Hello, friends, and thank you as always for visiting LSU Dynasties, the YouTube home of the Legend Sports Universe, all time dynasties, all the time. The LSU is a collection of dynasties run using sports simulation games, bringing the greatest players in history together in a single sports universe. The LSU uses out of the park baseball, franchise hockey manager, pro strategy football. It will soon be using Draft Day Sports Pro Basketball, but that project has gotten delayed with other stuff I've been doing here. And it also uses Title Bout Boxing, and that ties into this current project that brings you here now. The Title Bout to Fight Night conversion project is something I've been working on for the past couple of months. I grew up using the classic Title Bout Boxing board game back in the 80s. And I followed it through all of its different incarnations on PC as well, including when the originators, the Trunzos, were no longer involved in it. But Title Bout, at its heart, has always been the greatest simulation of boxing out there, and it's a piece of my childhood too. So it's got some nostalgia for me, but also the game has just always played and represented the sport really, really well. Of course, in the modern age, consoles are a big thing, graphics are a big thing. The best game doing that is Fight Night Champion. Fight Night Champion came out in 2011. There has not been a good boxing game created since. The boxing fans have kind of been ignored. And Fight Night Champion remains the best game for boxing for the consoles that is being created. I will touch on later, there is this esports boxing club game that is kind of in the works. Nobody's really sure exactly what its status is. It shows a great deal of promise. I believe it's going to be really good once it's eventually released, but not knowing when that is going to happen, my focus here has been working within the confines of Fight Night Champion. I'll deal with Esports Boxing Club and that potential project in a different video sometime over the next week or so. But I recently released, I guess it was yesterday, Tuesday, the first batch of 25 fighters into the Xbox Boxer Share for Fight Night Champion. Again, the PlayStation Boxer Share was taken down ages ago. So this project, you'll be able to put ratings into fighters for PlayStation if you want, and it will work the same way. But as far as being able for me to share them and get them out to you, for you to just be able to download and use, that is limited to Xbox. The Title Bout to Fight Night project is basically taking ratings from the Title Bout game for the greatest boxers in history, and fans of the game and devotees of the game have continued to create current fighters in line with Title Bout, in line with ratings, in line with their ratings guide. So we're still operating everything under the Title Bout standard, which is the gold standard as far as I am concerned. So I will talk more about the project as the fight goes on, but one thing I want to do is get into showing some fights of the fighters that I have created now that we're kind of in the home stretch of this. I've created a couple of videos previously with some fights in earlier incarnations of this project. You can certainly watch those and get a little bit of a feel, but I feel like all the fighters are kind of in a better place now. So with that being said, we're going to jump into a fight here that I thought would be a really interesting matchup. In the middleweight division, we're going to go with Triple G. Gennady Golovkin, coming off a good victory this past weekend, actually. Trying to set up a third match with Canelo Alvarez. This time, though, he goes back in time a little bit to lock up with the great Emile Griffith. So we're going to bring this to you live from the NGM Grand. There you see Gennady Golovkin getting ready to make his way into the ring. I'll kind of announce this and talk about the project at the same time, as I have done in past videos. So one of the reasons why I picked this matchup of the newly released fighters is I just think it's a great mix of styles. Golovkin coming ahead, good punch output, good power, good pressure. Emile Griffith, a great, slick, defensive fighter. He does not really have the power to hurt Golovkin, I don't believe. So really the question at hand is, can Griffith's defense and style pose enough problems for Golovkin for him to earn the decision? One of the big things that happens with this project is, and one of the reasons why it took a little bit longer than I wanted to, I started doing this a few months ago, and then I realized that there was CompuBox data actually posted online. So as I was developing these ratings, all of which are at their heart based off of Title Bout ratings and then modified a little bit with stats that I get from CompuBox, and occasionally just stuff that I have knowledge of the fighters from being a boxing fan for 30 plus years. But one of my biggest focus on this was to try to make sure that fighters fight the way that they would really fight. It's not just about getting the right guy to win, and I've said that before. It's about getting fighters to fight in their right style. You want a pressure fighter to fight like a pressure fighter. You want a high output fighter to be throwing a lot of punches. If you take a high output fighter, and the first video I ever posted was Meldrick Taylor and Wilfred Benitez. And Meldrick Taylor is a great example. Meldrick Taylor was a guy who averaged 80 plus punches around. If Meldrick Taylor beats the guys who he's supposed to beat, but is throwing 30 punches around, he might as well be John Smith. It doesn't matter that he's winning. He's not Meldrick Taylor at that point. So want to get the guys to kind of have their attributes and their skills and everything, get them to perform the way they should perform, not just beat the guys they should beat. So here, the punch data from CompuBox, there was not that much for Emile Griffith. It's very rare for older fighters. For guys before, I'd say about 1985, 1980 at the best, it's really just the top fighters who they've gone back and watched their fights and kind of computed data for. But before like 1970, there's virtually nobody. So Griffith only has a couple of fights kind of in the table for him, whereas Golovkin, of course, has more. But with that said, we'll take the data that we can get. Golovkin, I think I ended up being able to get, I think I got the full 10. I originally was going with 3 fights per fighter, and just kind of picking out 3 and using those. And the fluctuations in boxing, it's not like baseball where the stats are so specific. Styles make fights, and you've heard that. So different styles are going to make a fighter fight at least a little bit differently. I feel like you can get a good stat base from over 10, whereas from 3, especially if it's the case of Griffith, who's kind of fought the same guy twice, in his, the Griffith fights, the only punch data for him that CompuBox has is the fight against Benvenuti and both fights against Carlos Monzon. That's it. Monzon, being as unorthodox a fighter as he was, can really kind of throw a guy off. So Griffith's stats, I'm going with, are probably not as precise as the ones I have for Golovkin, but again, we'll take some data over no data. But punch outputs generally are going to be a little bit closer than, say, like punches landed, opponents' punches landed. So, I'm doing a separate video that's really going to kind of walk through the process a little bit more. I'll talk about it here, but I'm going to outline it a lot better in that other video. So kind of be on the outlook for that. That'll hopefully be out tomorrow. Here we go. We're about a minute into the second round. You see Golovkin pressuring. Griffith's kind of letting him. Griffith's just kind of being defensive, popping off a couple of shots when he can. But Golovkin is clearly pressuring, which is good because that's the way I believe this would really go. Golovkin's going to be trying the pressure, lands a good body shot there. So far, things look kind of nice here. So we're going off that punch stat data. The goal is to get guys in 4 categories. Punches thrown per round. The percentage of those punches that are jabs. That's a really, really important thing to nail when establishing a fighter's style. The percentage of punches landed and the opponent's punches landed percentage. The goal is to get everything within 20% of what the CompuBox punch data shows them to be. 20% probably sounds like a lot, but if you look through a fighter's history, there will be a lot of fluctuations around 20% between fights based, again, on the style of the guy they're fighting and such. If I tried to get everything within 5% of that average, it would never happen, because they'd fight one guy and it would look good, and they'd fight another guy and it would kind of go, be much different than that, and never would have gotten anywhere. 20% seems to be a good figure to sit on. Ideally, I'd get them within 10%. That would be considered a great, accuracy rating. But if we get everybody above an 80 grade, which is kind of, basically the percentage off that they are, there will be a couple of pauses like this. I had to stop the video on Xbox because it will only record continuously for like 10 minutes, and then you have to stop it and restart it. So back to the grades. When the fight is done, I'll show the grades for this fight. But basically, so if you're, say, 15% off from the amount of punch that says you should throw, you basically end up with an 85 grade for that category. And you go with that same thing applies to the jab percentage and the punches landed and the opponent's punches landed. And then you end up with your kind of fight grade is the average grade amongst those four things. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. The goal, of course, again, I want all four within 20%. If the average is within 20%, that's fine. But ideally, you want to get to that average with all four meeting the grades. So now the process now at this point is going to be, now that I'm starting to turn these fighters out, I'm basically going to turn out probably groups of 11 in each weight class. And then at that point, I'm going to have everybody fight each other once. And that'll give me kind of a 10-fight thing to judge their stats by, see where the stats are, and then make any final adjustments to the guys based on those. And then I'll issue an updated version of each fighter. I do not know what the timeline for that is going to be, because I want to get the first versions out of guys across all the weight classes before I start going in for the revisions, because the fine-tuning stuff is going to be very, very time-consuming. So at first, I just want to kind of get these guys out there. Once they meet that 20% threshold against, basically they're tested against a very solid base fighter that I created, and every fighter is tested against that same guy. So for the sake of uniformity, the other part of doing it that way is that it will allow me to kind of establish a trend in, because basically I have a ratings formula that utilizes the title bout ratings and the stats, and you plug the title bout ratings in and their punch stats, and then it spits out different ratings that are used for this. I have a lot of boxing knowledge. I love the sport. I love title bout. I'm very good at statistics and analysis of sports and fighters and such. So I'm confident in that. I am not perfect, and I make no claim to it. So it's very conceivable that I'll make a mistake or a miscalculation or whatever. But by doing it uniformly, if I make a mistake, it's going to be pretty much across the board. Golovkin really dictating the pace early here, and he's swept these first 3 rounds on the Fight Night Champion uses Teddy Atlas. I've turned the announcing off, so I'm not talking over that. But Golovkin's kind of in control here, starting faster. Griffith kind of feeling his way around though. But can Golovkin keep this pressure up for 12 rounds? And is Griffith going to start to kind of find his target and get a little bit more on the attack as things go on? So that'll be interesting to see here. Griffith hasn't really seemed particularly hurt at any point, but Golovkin is certainly dictating the action in the early going here. So doing things by the way that I'm doing them, if I'm making a mistake, it's going to be, all right, you have all your inside fighters are throwing too many punches. Your outside fighters aren't throwing enough jabs. That kind of thing, where you can just kind of say, okay, this is a miscalculation of my formula. I did everybody the same way, so I can go through and fix it for everybody. So that's really the purpose of doing that. I can understand someone saying, well, if you're going to judge everybody's stats against the same fighter, that's not perfect, because styles make fights. You are absolutely correct in that. But what I basically did was I took a boxer puncher, which is the most common style, and made a solid across the board. But no, that's a good uppercut from Golovkin. Griffith's in a bit of trouble here. He's going to kind of rely on his defense now to try to get himself a little bit of a breather. He recovered pretty quickly there. And so the stock fighter that I'm running everybody against is solid in every aspect, but not great in any aspect. So he has no particular strength and no particular weakness. So I'm hoping that kind of nullifies it a little bit. And he's just a good, solid, steady across the board fighter, which kind of minimizes as best as possible the whole different styles making different fights kind of thing, if that makes sense. So anyway, that's the reason for that kind of methodology. Just kind of focus on the fight for this round and kind of see if we can observe some things. Golovkin has kind of been in control so far. The title bout in the 100 sims ran of this fight. The later editions of the title bout game let you run big bulk sims, which is great for testing stuff like this. Actually has Golovkin winning the majority of the fights. He wins about 62% of them, mostly by decision. He does not knock him out. Griffith's too solid defensively for that. But Golovkin does win the majority of the fights, which is debatable. And I've seen, in a lot of different, I'm members of a lot of different boxing forums, and a lot of times when I go and I do these fights, I'll kind of look up how boxing fans feel the fights would go, in addition to obviously seeing how Title Bout says the fight would result. And this one is a very mixed one that I've seen. The majority of people seem to think that Griffith would find a way to a decision, but it would be close. But there are other people who just think that Golovkin would wear Griffith down. I'm not really sure on it, honestly. I think it's a very close, very competitive fight. I think the way this has gone so far is fair from the perspective of Golovkin's pressure is really kind of dictating things. I think Emile Griffith would probably be tying up Golovkin a little bit more and smothering him a little bit more than what he's doing here. His defense is more evasive here. And I think he kind of would he wouldn't be letting Golovkin get so much off because he'd smother him a bit. Griffith was very versatile. So I think his defensive tactic here is probably a bit different than how he would really do it. And that provides a decent jumping off point to this. That's the limitations of Fight Night Champion. It is a great game. It does a lot of things right. It does some things that I wish were a bit better, and this is kind of actually doing a very good job of displaying one of them. Inside fighting is a little bit tougher, especially from an inside defensive perspective. The leaning on a guy and tying a guy up, and not necessarily clinching him, just kind of smothering is really the best term for it. The game it's not quite that nuanced. I think a part of that is just kind of the graphic limitations of a physics-based kind of thing from the again, this game is from 2011. I mentioned earlier in the intro, and again, I'll release another video talking about hopes for this esports boxing club game. But one of the videos they released, I've had a big problem with how they're doing a lot of things as far as promoting, not promoting this game, letting you know what's going on and fit and whatever. And that can be debated, and that's fine. I certainly have. But the video from that game, it was just from an alpha version of it, but that gave me the most hope about that game is a clip of inside fighting. You know, a guy's head on the other guy's shoulder, and having your kind of shoulder in front of your jaw, you know, with your head down, your chin tucked to your chest, and kind of protecting yourself for that close range fighting where, you know, there's not that imaginary wall where like, this is as close as you can get, that kind of thing. You know, so there's a clinch, and that's good. Griffith seems to be actually doing a little bit more the last round than this round. He's kind of throwing a little bit more. He's popping off that jab in the straight, as you saw there, with a little bit more frequency, and seems to be kind of starting to control things a little bit more, you know, from his perspective. But that inside fighting, if you can get inside fighting right, I think if Fight Night Champion was able to do inside fighting right, it would really be hard to find a major knock on the fight aspects of it itself. There are things you can criticize about career mode and online and stuff like that, but especially for its time, again, being more than a decade old, the inside fighting, I kind of feel like, is the most limited aspect of the game. Again, strictly just from a how a fight goes standpoint. You know, so the Esports Boxing Club video gave a lot of promise on getting inside fighting right, and that's a big deal if they actually are able to get that right. And there have been kind of hiccups, and they're kind of very clearly hiding. You know, they don't want people to see a lot right now. And again, I'll do that. I'll do that in a different video, because I want to kind of keep this a little bit more focused. But the Esports Boxing Club thing has a lot of promise, but it's a very, very cautious optimism because of how they're handling things. That said, we're going to kind of, you know, we'll deal right now with this, and this has actually been a very, very entertaining fight. I really like the way Golovkin is fighting. He's doing pressure, but he steps in, he backs out, he regroups, he steps in again. If you've watched Golovkin, he does a lot. He does a lot of that. He's a pressure fighter, but he's not a constant come forward fighter. You know, he's intelligent pressure. So I think he's doing a very good job here. And now you're just kind of seeing Griffith. I like Griffith's defense as a whole, other than, again, the absence of that kind of smothering ability that I think would kind of be a little bit more of a difference maker for him in this fight. But I think he's probably won the past 2 rounds. But I mean, Golovkin swept the first 4. So after round 7 here, we'll see what the Teddy Atlas scorecard says. The Fight Night Champion had, I guess they were the old ESPN announcing team of Joe Tessitore and Teddy Atlas. And after the 3rd, the 7th, and the 10th rounds of fights, they give you the Teddy Atlas scorecard. The announcing in the game actually is not bad. It just doesn't make sense to have announcing on if I'm going to be talking throughout the video. But the announcing actually isn't bad. You play the game a lot, it gets a little bit repetitive, particularly, you know, Teddy Atlas's stories and stuff like that. But it's fine. It's a fun listen. So we'll see here. Round 8 getting ready to start. Oh, there you go. So they have Golovkin is sweeping 5 and taking 6 out of the first 7. Now, Atlas's card is not always in line with the judge cards at the end of this. So we'll kind of see how this goes. I'm actually kind of pulling a little bit for a Griffith comeback of sorts here, because while I absolutely think Golovkin could beat him, I don't think Golovkin steamrolls him. So the idea of Golovkin winning, you know, taking 6 out of 7, I think is a little bit a little bit off. I also haven't checked the fight stats. I'm not sure where the stats line up with what we're looking to see. We'll actually touch on that a little bit now as you look at the stats for them. So Emile Griffith, again, based on 3 fights with Benvenuti and his 2 fights with Monzon, what we are looking at from a stat perspective, hold on, let me get to my sheet here. So Emile Griffith threw 47 punches per round. 43% of those punches were jabs. He landed 36%. His opponents landed 26%. Gennady Golovkin, in the 10 fights that I have evaluated here, starting with his first title shot. His first title shot in the weight class. And then I go from the 10 fights forward from that, as long as there's ratings for them. And that kind of puts me in an area where I'm kind of feel like I'm judging a guy's prime. So Golovkin is 65 punches around. 45% of them are jabs. And it's funny, a lot of people talk about Golovkin not having a particularly good jab. It's not a great jab, but it's a solid jab, and he uses it, and he uses it well. Golovkin lands 37%. His opponents only land 20%. Now, again, this is part of where these stats are, they're a basis, but they're not the end-all, be-all, because a lot of it, again, will have to do with competition. Your big criticism of Golovkin, and it's not entirely his fault, of course, is just the level of competition that he had faced. Golovkin was past his quote-unquote prime before he ever started fighting fighters who anybody really knew. So fighting guys who he overmatched, those guys aren't going to land as much, on him, just because there's a different level of talent there. Carlos Monzon fought a lot of weak fighters too. You see, but Carlos Monzon was also, again, just a very odd fighter style-wise, I think. Because Monzon also didn't land a high percentage of punches. His punch stats, I don't have them right in front of me, but both came in and his punches landed and opponents' punches landed, averaged in the 20s. But Monzon just keep pumping that jab. Even if it was blocked, even if it didn't make contact, he didn't care. He was just going to keep that jab in your face for the whole fight. So the punch stats, again, they're good, they're helpful, they're a very good base, but they help provide the range, but they're not something that I'm married to. I'm far more focused on the activity level and the jab percentage than the punches landed and the opponent's punches landed, to a point. If a guy's averaging, across the 10 fights that I picked, from CompuBox, averaging, allowing 25% punches landed, and I run these and he's averaging 40%, that's different. That's very, very significant. And obviously something needs to be revised there. But if a guy who regularly allowed 25% is allowing 31%, which would be just outside that 20% range of 32%, even, when all the guys I'm creating, especially at the start of this, are all going to be, unless I have a few personal favorites, are all going to be guys who were top contenders, if not champions. So you're fighting a better level of fighter. Yeah, you're probably going to get hit a little bit more than you did as an average basis in your career. So that certainly is factored in. Griffith's popped off a couple of decent rounds here again. We'll see if that Atlas scorecard was right. I think Griffith has kind of taken 4 of the last 5 in my eyes here. But we'll kind of see how this goes. We should get another Teddy Atlas score update after this 10th round. I'm happy with the speed. I'm happy with the snap of the jab. I like Griffith's overall movement. I wish the smothering thing on the inside was a little bit better for him, because otherwise when he comes inside here, he's not really doing much, even when he comes inside, unless he's throwing. He's not really rallying anything together when he's inside, because he's not smothering anything and, infighting a bit. And Griffith could infight. He did not have much power, but he could scrap with you because he was so intelligent and his defense was so good. He could handle himself in there. So I certainly don't think he would have backed off from Golovkin, throughout the fight. Griffith wasn't really an outside fighter per se. A couple good hooks there from Golovkin that looked solid, but it looked like Griffith may have gotten the hand up to block a couple of those. Golovkin's missing a lot. Definitely seems to be slowing down. You can see his stamina is worn down a little bit. The stamina criticism in Fight Night Champion, I've heard a lot of people say that, and I don't know what everybody's sliders are or whatever, that the stamina doesn't go down for guys. I like the stamina staying high. I err on that side, largely because I find that Fight Night, as your stamina goes, your performance really suffers too much. So I find, and more it leads to a lot of knockdowns late in fights and stuff like that. And I felt like the proportion of that was too high. So on my sliders, I've got most things maxed. I've got power down. I think it's like 10 ticks total from the minimum to the maximum. I think it's 10. I don't have it in front of me. There you see Griffith. So Griffith's taken 3, taking the last 3. The 10-8 rounds are silly, though. That is a flaw in. I'll get to that one in a minute. I want to tackle one thing at a time here and talking about Fight Night limitations. Back to the stamina thing. You'll see that Golovkin's stamina is down a bit here, which is fine. It's still around that middle level, a little less than middle. He's a 95 stamina out of 100. So he's expending a lot of energy trying to pressure Griffith. And even though he's got very good stamina, it is starting to weigh on him a bit. But if I didn't have the stamina slider maxed, he would be down near the end of his stamina, and then you'd see stuff like Griffith, putting him down, which could happen anyway. But I'd allow for one knockdown. But with the way the stamina works, if you don't have it maxed, a guy's stamina bottoms out, and then he'll get dropped. He'll get dropped 3 times in a couple of rounds late in the fight once his stamina gets below a certain level. So, that's, again, it's just something that kind of has to be worked around within the game, how the game is handled. The other thing that you saw there, 10-8 rounds. It's a glitch, and I don't know what kicks it in, but late in fights, Fight Night gives a lot of 10-8 rounds that it shouldn't. So kind of, like when I'm doing this for my own just kind of benefit, I kind of judge it as I won't count it as a 10-8 round unless there was a knockdown. I'm not exactly sure what the trigger is, but like you'll look at a lot of these 10-8 rounds that they score, and you'll go through the punch stats, and it just doesn't bear it out. Guys are landing the same number of punches or similarly and stuff like that. And so it's just, again, the game is really, really good. The actual fight mechanism is really, really good. That's what makes so much of the little stuff so frustrating. Stuff like that, like the 10-8 rounds thing, is just, it's a silly oversight that playtesting should have caught and said, hey, why is that happening? 10-8 rounds without knockdowns. I mean, yeah, they can happen, but they usually happen when a guy is very, very clearly in control. In title bout parlance, people are familiar with that game, though. If you see a guy put up a 27-3 kind of a round, even without a knockdown, you can see a 10-8 there, and that's totally valid. In terms of like points from punches landed and stuff like that. Again, if you don't have any familiarity with title bout, that reference probably doesn't mean much to you. But again, I'm assuming if you're watching this, you're a fight fan, so a 10-8 round can happen without a knockdown. It just should not happen with anywhere near the frequency that it happens late in fights in Fight Night Champions. So everything kind of has to be adjusted a little bit for that if you're looking at scores. And it's also inconsistent. It does not happen. It happens too often without being often, if that makes sense. Like you'll go through plenty of fights where there's not a 10-8 round late and it's handled, and it's the scoring is actually very, very good. But there's like some sort of a glitch or a trigger that I haven't really been able to nail down yet that kicks a 10-8 round into effect. And that's a bad thing. Look now, Golovkin's the one backing up. Griffith is putting more pressure on. Griffith is kind of taking control in the second half of this fight. And I do believe he was winning those rounds. They just shouldn't have been 10-8 rounds. Final 30 seconds here. Trying to close out the show. So we are going to go the distance, which I'm happy with. I knew that Griffith wouldn't knock Golovkin out. And again, I have no problem if Golovkin wins this fight. I think that's very possible. I do not believe that Golovkin would knock Emile Griffith out. So I'm happy that this fight went the distance. That is a very good sign. We will go to the decision. Let us see what happens. Let's see if that 10-8 stuff comes through on the regular judges' scorecards too. Usually if it comes through on Teddy Atlas' scorecard, you'll see 10-8s on the regular scorecards also. So Griffith gets the decision. Considering that, according to Atlas, he gave away the first 4, maybe even was 5 rounds. That's a great comeback for Griffith. Again, possible. Let's see how this shakes out. All right. So you've got, those 10-8 rounds matter. You got a couple of 10-8s in there. There was no knockdown there in the 10th or 11th. Neither of those should have been a 10-8 round. Those should both have been 10-9 rounds. This really should have ended up being 114-114 on the cards. Let's take a look at these fight totals. So you see Griffith lands 35%. Golovkin lands 26%. Let's go round 12. Let's back it up. That's a fine win there. Let's get to... all right, so it's the 10th and the 11th. Let's go back here and look at punch totals a little bit and see what if there's something that maybe I missed watching as far as the 10th and 11th. Round 11. All right, 34-22. Golovkin lands 17-13 for Griffith. That's not a 10-8 round. Yes, obviously Golovkin threw a lot more punches, but still he landed more. So Griffith, you can say controlled whatever ring generalship there. He landed a greater percentage. Round 10, even that. I mean, yes, 40-19 is a big percentage gap. But I mean, Golovkin lands, roughly the same number of punches. There's not a difference really in damage there. That's not a 10-8 round. That's not a 10-8 round. So the real result here, I think, is 114-114. And maybe if you watch it, you would think that it was a different score based on what you saw, which is totally fine. But just based on the fight night scoring mechanism, if that 10-8 issue wasn't broken, you've got a 114-114 matchup between two of the greats. We go through the punch totals. So for the punches landed and opponent's punches landed, it basically took an average. So your expected was, the average between Golovkin's land percentage per CompuBox of 37 and Griffith's, opponent's punches landed of 26. That means that Golovkin should have landed 31.5. Griffith should have landed 28 based on that. So the actual results, Golovkin threw 72 punches per round, compared with CompuBox's 65, so that's a 10.8% difference. Excellent. Through 40% of his punches were jabs. regularly would be 45%. That's 11.1% off. Again, really, really solid. We love that. 20 landed 26% compared to 31.5%, which is what would be figured. That's a 17.5% gap, still within the 20% range. We're good with that. Griffith landed 35% per CompuBox, based on the average again, because Golovkin's opponent's punches landed for the CompuBox was so low at 20%. So that's a 25% gap for Griffith there. Not ideal, but that's kind of the least of my worries, I admit, because I think that 20% figure of Golovkin's is a little bit artificial, just based on, again, competition like we talked about. For Griffith threw 39 punches per round as opposed to the 47 per the CompuBox stat. So that's a 17% miss. Still within 20%. We're good with that. Would have liked him to throw a little more because I think he probably would have. But he kind of relented, especially early, to Golovkin's pressure. Jab percentage, he threw 33%. His CompuBox says he threw 43%, so that's off by 23%. So we'll keep an eye on that for the next few sims that we do of Griffith and see if maybe that's something that needs to be adjusted down the line. Punches landed percentage, as we said, is 25% off. His will just be the inverse of Golovkin, so his punches landed is off by 25%. If he landed 35, he should have landed 28 according to CompuBox. And Golovkin's punches landed against Griffith. Griffith's opponent's punches landed was off by 17.5%, again within the 20. So the overall grade, Golovkin gets an 84, technically an 83.9. Griffith gets a 79.3. So I'll probably run another sim with Griffith. I mean, really, I don't want to go doing this based on one fight at all. So, I mean, I'm not going to adjust anything on Griffith right now because, again, he's just outside that 80% grade by 0.7. I'm not going to worry about that too much. We'll see once he runs through, 9 other middleweights and he gets 10, fights against 10 middleweights from my list. Then we'll kind of see where everybody is at. But, so both of these guys, Golovkin's in the range. Griffith is right on the cusp of it. I don't really have any issue with that right now. It's solid. I like it. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully it'll be a little bit better, as the upcoming fights go. But I didn't want to, run, I wasn't going to just run it and say, oh, well, this result isn't absolutely perfect and both guys aren't getting grades of 95 and use that as the example. I kind of want to be honest and show people the process. Upcoming, I'm going to post a video probably tomorrow that is really going to be process oriented with a little more descriptions of how I'm coming about the ratings and what I'm doing, so you can know a little bit more about the project. I might get another fight up tomorrow. We'll see. But I do want to get that up. The process video up won't be anywhere near as long as this. Just kind of give to people. I've refed to people to the YouTube channel from the Xbox Boxer share in the comments. I ref them here, so I want to make sure that I kind of post a video explaining the project and the process there, and how I'm going about everything. Because being open about that and telling people how you're doing stuff, I just kind of feel like that's the way you should go about things. Not that I'm charging anything for any of this, but even so, it's just kind of my personality. But anyway, so I'll get that video up describing everything, and I'm also going to post a list of fighters that are planned for this. And you're going to start seeing some guys with some frequency coming forward. I thank people who've been patient with this project as it's been in the works. And I do have the other stuff come back to the Legend Sports Universe, closing in on the All-Time Baseball League playoffs and the Legend Sports Universe Hockey League playoffs as well. So we got some good stuff coming here. As always, thank you for tuning in. If you have not yet, kindly subscribe, and there will be more content coming soon with some regularity. Honestly, this project has been eating up a lot of my time recently, so the other leagues and universes in the Legend Sports universe haven't gotten as much attention in these past few weeks as intended, but we've got some good stuff coming, and I've got a big plan for this Title Bout the Fight Night project too. once I get enough fighters populated for it. So maybe we'll give a little bit of a glimpse of that too. But be good to each other. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.